Omari Thomas was announced as the SEC Football Leadership Council member from Tennessee. It'll be their representative. So we've seen a lot of instances in which Tennessee has had players step up from a leadership role. And one that I mentioned was Cooper Mays. And I've talked to him about being a leader and what that means in 2023. And it's significant. There's no question about that, that he was already a leader in 2022. And I think sometimes he maybe undersells himself as a leader in 2022, but he's one of those guys that really stepped up. So I talked to Jacob Warren about this, and excluding Hendon Hooker, who was the guy who Jacob said stepped up the most time and would provide the juice, so to speak. Other than Jacob, who were some guys who stepped up in leadership roles last year that you were impressed with? Is there any that stand out in particular? Because for the most part, Caleb, except for the South Carolina game, I thought this team had great leadership from within.
Yeah, I was always big on Trey Flowers
Nice.
as a leader. And I said, I think that there are a lot of safeties in Tennessee football history who, because of weaknesses elsewhere in the secondary, did damage to their own draft stock to cover for issues elsewhere. And I think Trey Flowers did that, very similar to what Jonathan Hethney did in 2007, what Rashad Baker did in 2003. Those are really the three standout ones that I feel like they sacrificed their NFL career. They sacrificed their NFL draft standing to cover for some glaring weaknesses. And Trey Flowers did a lot of that. So he's a big one for me. I would have said Jeremy Banks until South Carolina. And then I'm like, oh, Jeremy Banks was a net negative for the team this past year. So, and
Yeah, I think that there's a difference between being a great player and a great leader. Um, Darnell Wright, for instance, was a fantastic player, but I don't know that he was the raw guy. I don't know that that's his style. Um, I think guys can be outspoken when they need to be. I think most anybody in a college football team can be. But as far as guys that I think need to step up from a leadership role, I think it starts and ends with Joe Milton to a large extent. I mean, if he is not anywhere near the leader that Hendon Hooker was, then you probably got a problem. Yeah, I think that Joe Milton will be that type of leader, but he's going to be different. While Hendon Hooker was quiet from all that I've talked to, and unless he needed to be loud, um, Joe Milton is more outgoing, and he needs to, I believe, make sure that when he does assume a leadership role, that Caleb, it's not lost in the noise of being an outgoing guy anyway. So Hendon was kind of the baseline, is quiet, and when he stepped up, everybody listened. You want Joe Milton to be able to step up and talk, but I don't think that they can possibly have a leader anywhere in the nation as good as Hendon Hooker was last year.
yeah, and you can lead in both ways. I think the 97 SEC championship team, Peyton Manning and Leonard Little, wasn't Leonard Little the quieter guy, but was still a leader, whereas Peyton Manning was obviously outgoing, very outgoing. And bigger than that, Peyton Manning was very outgoing, a big personality, also very demanding. The next year, I think it's one of the reasons I always felt Tennessee struggled in the first half of '98 was it seemed like there was an adjustment just to T. Martin's leadership style. It wasn't that he wasn't a leader; it was just that he was much more calm, should we say, than Peyton Manning was, and I guess a lot more. I guess he approached his team very different than T. Martin than Peyton Manning did, and it seemed like there was a big adjustment. But it that can work out too. And T. Martin didn't need to be that vocal because you had Al Wilson on the other side being intense. So I think you can. Your quarterback has to be a leader. The type of leader they have to be is not set in stone.
Yeah, I think that if you go back to that 1997 SEC championship game, the torch was passed from Leonard Little and Peyton Manning to Al Wilson. Yeah, he got in a lot of people's face, and he was determined that Tennessee was not going to lose that game. They trailed by 13 points going into the second half, I believe.
10. Jeff Hall hit a field goal right before halftime expired.
Okay,
the first half expired.
So they trailed in that game, Caleb, and it looked like they were going to fall short of an SEC championship in Peyton Manning's senior year, and that would have been awful to see him not win a championship. As any sort of Tennessee fan out there, would have been just horrendous. You would lump that together with not beating Florida, and then you question his college career, which is probably unfair for one player. But that is the moment that Al Wilson took over that team when by multiple witnesses, I was told um, that in that locker room there seemed to be a loss amongst the current leaders of Peyton and Leonard Little, and that's when Al Wilson just kind of took over. So you need those guys. We're going to learn who those guys are, but as far as other leaders on the field, I'm not really sure who else those guys are. I think they'll develop over spring practice and in the summer when those leaders are built. Anybody else stand out to you as potential leaders for this football team heading into 2023?
It's so far out. It's hard to know because so many key guys were lost. Maybe Tank McCullough. I think he's coming back. He's been with Tennessee now since 2019. He's been basically a starter since 2019. You might see Tank really, Jalen McCullough really step up, and he's the new safety now that might have to do what Trayvon Flowers had to do last year. And so maybe him. Aaron Beasley's coming back. He's the only returning linebacker with any experience in production whatsoever. So you could see something with him.
You kind of stole my thunder a little bit. I think that Beasley will be in more of a leadership role. I think by nature of the position of playing the mic, that's going to happen. So that was actually who I was going to go with.